At the end of the day, you know what you need to do. You're a grown up, there's this idea of work-life balance, which I think is a bit of a farce. It's this idea that you go to work for 8 hours a day and that's your work part. And then when you're exhausted, you go home and you have your family part, which is your balance. And it never seemed to jive. I think what people have found interesting about us is we try to think of work-life integration, which is that you have a fixed number of hours that you're available during a day. And on Tuesday, you might want to spend your high energy hours training for a triathlon. And on Thursday, you might want to spend your high energy hours having a client call, and giving people the autonomy to make that decision about how they spend their high and low energy time is something that's really been important to us as a company. I think it's resonated with a lot of people.
Welcome to Grow Think Tank. This is the one and only place where you will get insight from the founders and the CEOs of the fastest growing privately held companies. I am the host. My name is Gene Hammett. I help leaders and their teams navigate the defining moments of their growth. Are you ready to grow? Many people see challenges with remote cultures, and I understand it because there's a lot of complexities and a lot of things that we're missing when we're not face to face. The small little conversations on the side, the groups to lunch, or maybe it's just other things where people are able to see what other people are doing and what they're wearing and who they are. When we don't have that, it's harder to build the kind of culture we want. Well, is that true? Or is that a story you've made up in your head? Because today we're going to look at a strong remote culture. What are the key elements of strong remote cultures through the eyes of someone who's been remote for the entirety of the entire company, which is about 12 years. Our special guest today is Ryan Malone. He's the co-founder of SmartBug Media. They were number 2,638 on the Inc. list in 2020, and they've continued to grow through acquisitions and through other things that keep them abreast of what's really happening with their smart remote culture. We look at some of the specific things that you can be doing inside your culture. There's some ideas in here that you can actually steal ethically and apply them today, and they cost you nothing, but they would help you create the kind of culture you want. Now, it takes great leadership to create this culture. You have to be intentional, you have to be effective, and I want to make sure that you understand I can support you to be the best leader you can be. In fact, if you want to up-level your leadership skills, you want to change the way you listen, your leadership presence, the communication, delegation, the way you align culture, the way you talk about strategy and vision, mission, how you use those things. There's a lot of complexity inside of leadership. I'd love to help you do that. I'm an executive coach to fast growth companies, but you don't have to be on the Inc. list. You have to be driven. You have to want to be a better leader. If you want to be an extraordinary leader, I want to talk to you about what the next step is for you. You have to remove some things. You have to unlearn some things. And that's really important for us to have this. I can get to the heart of it in a few minutes, but typically I give you as much time as I can to help you really see what's next. If you want to schedule your call, just go to genehammett.com and click on schedule your call. And I would love to get to know you and help you create that plan to be the best leader you can be. Now, here's the interview with Ryan. Ryan, how are you?
I'm good, Gene. How's it going?
I am great. Excited to have you on the podcast.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Well, I've already let our audience know a little bit about you and what we're talking about today, but I would love for you to tell us about the company. So tell us about SmartBug Media.
Yeah, so we are an intelligent inbound marketing agency. We're the highest rated HubSpot partner in the world. We help companies grow their revenue by using digital channels, content marketing, PR, web development, and things of that nature.
Love it. HubSpot has made a real splash in what they're doing with their technologies. But beyond that, are you familiar with some of the things they do inside their culture that makes them really stand out?
They do. I think that's, I always tell when I talk to HubSpot executives that I've never met a HubSpotter that was a jerk. And I think that one of the things they do hiring wise is they just hire really solid people. And it's really clear that every one of those people is valued at their company.
Now, I gave a speech and I saw a HubSpot person talk about the culture and talk about the business that they're in. And he had mentioned the fact, and I used to actually talk about this quite a bit, but I don't anymore, but they actually made everyone a designated insider. Are you familiar with that what they did?
I'm not, no.
I won't go too much into it here because maybe they don't do it anymore, but at one point in time, they went public. And when you go public, you're not really allowed to share secrets across the company. And they really value transparency across their culture. And they said, well, we've got a solution for that. We'll make every person a designated insider. And they carried that on for many years. So I'm not sure if it's still going or not. But today we came here to talk about culture and why that really is important for a growing company. So when you think about culture, what do you think makes us a strong culture?
I think for us, we've always been remote. So for us, we had this premise that you should be able to have a challenging career with people you have this deep intellectual respect for, but at the same time have flexibility to do the things that matter in your life, which are memories, creation of memories. So for us, the culture is the glue, and arguably it's the only glue. I think in in-person companies, you have other pieces of things that hold people together, but in a remote company, culture and the people are fundamentally the glue that keeps everything together.
Well, a lot of companies have struggled with the remote workforce. And I think a lot of companies like you who went remote first, thought about what's the big deal. I think if you could probably have some empathy for people who weren't remote and all of a sudden they were thrown into it. We're a year and a half into this right now. We're still in flux in many places. And employees really love the remote aspects. Many times they really love the flexibility. I'm sure there's other things they love. What are you seeing across your organization? What people love about remote?
For us, it's autonomy and independence. So we, at the end of the day, what you need to do. You're a grown up, there's this idea of work-life balance, which I think is a bit of a farce. It's this idea that you go to work for 8 hours a day and that's your work part. And then when you're exhausted, you go home and you have your family part, which is your balance. And it never seemed to jive. I think what people have found interesting about us is we try to think of work-life integration, which is that you have a fixed number of hours that you're available during a day. And on Tuesday, you might want to spend your high energy hours training for a triathlon. And on Thursday, you might want to spend your high energy hours having a client call, and giving people the autonomy to make that decision about how they spend their high and low energy time is something that's really been important to us as a company. I think it's resonated with a lot of people.
I talked to a lot of CEOs about energy and what time they are at their highest, most creative. Is that kind of what you're looking at? But you're looking at across the organization, every employee has that same, what time they do their best work?
Yeah. And I think if you look at we're a professional services company. So there's client calls and there's things like that, or they're kind of the intersection of everything. But at the end of the day, what I want to get out of my day that's important to me, not just from a work perspective, but personally, and what you do are completely different. And as long as we touch in the middle for the client obligation and the team obligation that we have, I really don't care when you do your work. And you might decide that it's important for you to see your grandma or train for a race or whatever. And that might be where you want to block out your time first. We always encourage people to do that. And you may have a totally different schedule. And so I think assuming that you're hiring good people and you trust them to do the work that they've signed on to do, then the rest of it is really easy because they get to choose their own adventure, if you will.
We came here to talk about a strong remote culture. And, a lot of people want to know, what are we doing to create the bond and connections across relationships? What will we see inside your organization?
The first thing is transparency. So at the end of the day, we always found that the more information we can share, specifically the rationale for why we make certain decisions, it doesn't mean that everybody's going to like them, but they can at least empathize with them. And in a remote company, you don't have the water cooler talk to get the why just kind of passively through your day. And so you really have to be deliberate. And you also have to be deliberate about what we call listening sessions. You fundamentally have to pick up the phone and say, what can SmartBug do better? And you have to listen. And we created a program, which I'm happy to hop into about that stuff. But I think those two things, and then some other strategies that we have, are really important for the foundation, because sometimes when things get tough, you need to know that people trust you and that they trust the fact that you're making the best decision in the interest of the company and with them.
Transparency is something I talked about when I brought up HubSpot. And that's one reason why I brought it up, because it's a great example of the openness of conversations. And a lot of people think that is about the financials or the sales numbers or profitability. And that is included into it. But I think transparency is really another side to it, is the conversations we have, feedback we're willing to give and accept from others. Would you say you guys have that kind of transparency?
Yeah, I think that, what you listed are certainly some of it. I think some of it is also vulnerability. Like, if you look at we're 200 people if you count both the companies we have, but 135 of SmartBug. And so I think being vulnerable and understanding what you don't know, it's okay to tell somebody you don't know the answer to something, but it's also okay to communicate and make sure that people are aware that you have a process for understanding something that you don't know. And so in addition to finance stuff and all the other kind of transparency things, I think it's eye-opening to us when people can have an honest conversation about something they know and they don't know, and they know that together you're going to work on figuring it out.
Now, hold on. Ryan just said it's okay not to know the answer. I think a lot of leaders believe that we must know the answer. I'm not sure if this comes directly from the top within your organization or if it's just something that's showing up in the middle of the organization. If your company is growing, then you probably have managers that are afraid to say that they don't know the answer because it makes them look bad. It makes them look like they don't know what they're doing. And the reality is what we need inside of our cultures is leaders that are strong and confident and willing to say, I don't know the answer, but we can figure this out. We can move forward. Now, a lot of us went through the COVID time not knowing how to move forward, but we did figure it out. And I think a lot of the resilience inside of our organizations are really important. It's okay not to know the answer. And that starts with you. You've got to lead by example. It's okay for you to say, I don't know the answer to that. I'm repeating this multiple times because it's a very important concept to understand that being the CEO or the founder or being the leader in charge of a team, it's okay to not know the answer. Back to Ryan. When you think about your own leadership of, a strong remote culture, what has had to change over the last 18 months?
For us, not a ton over the last 18 months because we've been doing remote for, 12 years. What I think changes just in general is the normal ebb and flow of life. So we have always taken a position of, if your kid walks in the room, I want to meet him. If you have stuff on your desk, I want to know what it is. Like, for example, you've got a Saints helmet, but you're from Georgia. So we didn't get a chance to talk about that yet, but I want to know. And so, but I think that especially when COVID came, like there's just a lot of stuff you got to write off to COVID. Like people, I think when you're remote and you don't have a chance to talk to people all the time, you have to give people the benefit of the doubt and know that they have other external things that are pressuring them in their life. And sometimes, you just got to tell people to go home. You just got to tell people to relax and take a day off. And you just have to give people some slack because everybody's out there doing their best. And ultimately, some days you just need a little bit of a break.
Love all of this. Ryan, you've been talking about, how to create a strong culture, a strong remote culture specifically. When you think about moving forward or looking at what you're doing, are you guys planning to do anything different as you continue to grow?
We try to reinvent ourselves about every 18 months. So I always tell people that we should be building the systems that are capable for a company twice our size, because if you wait too long to build them, then you're kind of in crunch time. And when you're remote, sometimes the signals don't come up as much as you want them to, as if you were in an office. But we look at the way that we structure our work. There's 4 phases of work. There's the planning phase, there's the people phase, there's the production phase, which is effectively the equivalent of your manufacturing, and then and the measurement phase. And so we look at like how we structure the work, how we structure our teams, and we're constantly trying to figure that out, because for us, the handoff is really important. It's kind of like the Olympics. The US lost the Olympics, not because we weren't the fastest, but because the handoff of the baton in the relay race was bad. So if you don't do the handoff right, then the rest of it doesn't matter. And so it's really important to rethink that handoff as much as you need to.
Now, Ryan just said something I want to make sure we put a spotlight on. Build systems for a company twice our size. Now, that seems really logical in some senses, and maybe it seems like overkill, but here's the thing. A lot of fast growth companies are really imploding because they don't have the systems to handle the level of growth and demand they have for their product. It's a good problem to have, but you want to make sure you're the intentional leader, that you're actually looking at systems and make sure that they are able to withstand the level of growth you have. And if you're always building for twice your size, it's a pretty good way to make sure you're staying ahead, because as you continue to grow, you'll continuously look and improve things to make sure that they're not going to break under the pressure of the demand of this. Now, this is a great problem to have. You as a leader want to make sure that you're intentional across this, and you align others to be intentional and make sure this is a priority as you continue to grow. Back to Ryan. What will you see unique inside your organization? Anything that you guys do that you feel like is different than your peers?
Yeah, sure. So we have a program called Healthy SmartBug. It came from this idea that as a parent, I know you're a dad, I teach my kids that my job as a parent is to keep them happy, healthy, safe, and resilient till they're old enough to do it on their own. And so if I look at how does that translate? One day we were talking and somebody was like, hey, Ryan, you always say this about your kids. Well, what about SmartBug? They're kind of your kid, right? And they were right. And so happy is happy clients and engaged employees. Healthy is, healthy financials, sound decision-making. Safe is like calculated risk-taking. And resilient is, sometimes life just throws something at you and you have to have the space mentally and physically physically to be able to handle it. So we wrap a whole bunch of things, those listening sessions and other things around healthy SmartBug. And that's how we measure ourselves. We ask our team what they can do to make SmartBug healthier. We pick different things to ask them about, and then we report back to them on what we've enhanced based on that feedback. That's one thing. Another thing that maybe if I can, you mind if I touch a little bit about the difference between like in-office kind of sticky points and remote sticky points? I think
Sure.
It might be useful. Yeah. So if you work in a normal physical office and say you're with a bunch of marketers or a bunch of accountants, you're going to go to lunch with the accountants or the marketers. You're going to go to lunch with your tribe. You're going to go to happy hour with your tribe. You're going to do all those things. In a remote model, you don't have that because everybody's everywhere. So we created these things called get to know you calls. And in the beginning, when we were smaller, everybody had to do a get to know you call with everybody at the company. They're 20 minutes. The only rule is you can't talk about work. And it's designed to create these connection points. So when you get done with one of these calls, you figure out who the coffee aficionados are, who likes bourbon, who likes sports, who likes to read. And those become your departments, if you will, that you might have had if you were at a normal office. And they also become your support systems. So if everybody does these get to know you calls, pretty soon you have these very passionate, vibrant tribes of people that have different interests. And they accelerate onboarding, they accelerate kind of safe feedback, they accelerate friendships. That's proved to be a really powerful thing for us in taking somebody that doesn't know anybody to somebody who knows a good amount of people in a very quick, kind of comfortable way.
I love that. So a new employee coming in, are they expected to do the same thing?
Yeah. So they have to go, now that we're bigger, the first thing they do, all of our leadership team reach out to them first because we want to make sure they know that they're valued, because they are. They're the most valuable thing that's happened to us that particular day. And then they do get to know you calls with all the people on their direct team. And then most importantly, we give people the time and space to be able to do those get to know you calls as they meet people. So we encourage people, if you're on a call with somebody you don't know, to follow up with them after that call and have a get to know you call. And we've had people that become friends and travel around the world. We've had people across the country that end up having great relationships. And that also is some of the glue that holds us together.
I love this story of really creating a place where people get to do it, and it's more natural. It's not something, it doesn't feel like it's too forced. You're just encouraging it. Is that fair to say?
Yeah. And it's great because people, they get to talk about something they're comfortable with people that share an interest. And so their guard's down. And I think it's so much better than that. Let's go out to lunch with the department thing that you usually do when you start with somebody. And so it's worked out really well for us. Love
all that. Ryan, I'm kind of curious about your own journey of leadership. What's one of the biggest mistakes you've made that you could share with us?
Oh man, I think every fast growth entrepreneur has that one. It's, letting go a little bit. I think, when you start a company, like a lot of people on your podcast have, or they're in that phase where they've started a new group, you've oftentimes done everything. And so you've figured out a way that you do it. And so I think, I waited a little bit too long to delegate more things than I wanted to, which probably hurt us in the beginning, but it's a lesson that you think about every day when you take on a new responsibility. So in the long run, I think that was a good lesson to learn, but it did cause a little bit of pain in the beginning. So imagine you can relate.
I can relate to that myself personally, but I can also relate to it for my clients. It is something, letting go is one of the hardest things to do, especially founders. Founders have this, it's my baby. We want to do it in a certain way and whatnot. When you were able to overcome this, what was the real catalyst behind that?
The real catalyst was we did like some really deep reflection to figure out, because at the time when I started SmartBug, I had never run a pro services agency. I came up through tech marketing and stuff like that. And so I knew where there's some things that we did really well that we worried about and shouldn't. And there were some things probably that we didn't even know we weren't doing well. So when we did that reflection, all roads ran through me. And I think that's really common in small businesses. And so, but it wasn't easy to kind of delegate responsibilities. I think learning how to delegate and delegating things to somebody with a vision and the constraints that they have to work with, and then letting them run with it, I think really was the game changer, because you already feel like as a company, you hire, smart driven people, and you can really mitigate the risk if you give them a bit of a vision and some guardrails as they move forward, so that when they come back, that there's a high probability that they've solved the problem that they need to solve.
We're here talking about smart remote culture. Actually, we're here to talk about strong remote cultures. And we haven't talked about one thing that we always talk about in cultures, and that's core values. How much emphasis do you guys put on the core values of the company?
We put a lot. So one of our interviews is designated purely to values assessment. We believe that the values that we have are really important to us in terms of delivering good client work with people that you trust. And so we look for examples of those types of values in the people that we hire, because we know if they don't have them, that they're not going to fit here. It doesn't mean they're not a great person. They're just not going to fit here. One of the values that's not like a core value, but something we look for that might be useful for people that are trying to build remote, is that it is really hard, if you're trying to build a remote company, to not hire somebody who is participatory in the culture. In other words, if you're remote and you're super, super quiet and you don't want to chip in whatever your little way is, it's really, really hard. And so we look for people that you can be shy, but you still, in your own communicative style, need to be able to contribute to our culture. And I think that's a sticky point here.
We've been talking about the strong remote culture. I want to give you a chance. Is there anything we missed that you want to make sure we put a spotlight on?
I think the biggest thing is that you have to do remote first. So there's a lot of talk about hybrid and non-hybrid and every flavor of it. But if you're going to build a strong remote culture, you have to design for the weakest link. And if the weakest link is the office room where everybody's on a conference call and the remote team is on a Zoom, it's the 5-minute chit chat that happens before a meeting that really is the soul of your company. So I strongly encourage, even if you do remote, or if you do hybrid, that everybody be on a conference call. This idea, you don't necessarily need to be in a conference room sitting there with people, but have everybody be on a conference call. So that 5 minutes is the same for everybody. I think that goes a long way for people that I would share. And then the other thing is, I would say that try to find something that's associated with your brand that you can do that's unique. Like we have this event called SmartBug Palooza, which we take our team to a 5-star resort somewhere. And the whole idea is to associate like your brand with this great experience that people otherwise wouldn't have had, with the types of friendships that they're going to build that they don't see all the time. And that like physical connection with people occasionally is really the fuel that gets you through the next year.
I love all of that. I got a question though, before we close up this, the 5-minute chit chats, are you doing that across most meetings or all meetings where it's sort of a personal conversation before we dive into work?
They just happen. I mean, it's kind of like ours was, right? Like, I think they just happen. And when you have people that work with people that they like and have clients that they like and customers that they like, you start to become part of people's lives, and it's just natural. I think the difference is most meetings will tell you be there sharply right on time, and we're going to start the meeting. We say be there sharply right on time so you can have a couple laughs and then we'll start the meeting in 5 minutes. I think that goes a long way.
Yeah, I love it. Ryan, thanks for being here.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
I'm going to wrap up here. Here's what I take away from today's conversation. Creating a strong remote culture takes a lot of intention. One of the things that you want to be intentional about is transparency. We talked about inside this, and I really think that a lot of leaders are resisting that at some level. There's a transparency line, and you got to be careful where you draw that line, because it does matter if you want to create a great culture. You want to also you really focus on the core values of your company. It's something that really will help you create those boundaries, become a better leader, because you can enforce those things and others can enforce them for you. Hiring is one of the biggest things I've seen where this comes into play, is making sure you're interviewing people based on core values, and that will help you create the culture you want. When you think about your own leadership, are you really curious about what's next for you? Well, I have a special process I walk my leaders through. I can actually do this for you in a few minutes, but I can help you figure out the blind spots that are getting in your way. Ryan talked about his not letting go. At some point in time, that was a blind spot. He didn't see it as being a problem, but it was. He realized he had to overcome that. Well, I share all this with you because I want to help you be the leader that your team deserves. Just go to genehammett.com, schedule your call. I'd love to help you be that leader. When you think of growth and you think of leadership, think of Growth Think Tank. As always, with courage. We'll see you next time.